Welcome. I'm Bryce Winter, author of How to Work with Teams and Signs and Symbols of Success. And I'm so excited and grateful today to be interviewing my sister, an author, a film producer, a television writer, and a multi-talented, multilingual person of many, many, many aspects today. And we're going to be taking a dive into what drives us, particularly where's the dark side, and what's the value in it. Aurora, welcome.
Thanks so much, Bryce. I'm super excited about this conversation. I think people are going to discover some power and maybe even some money and some breakthroughs by exploring this. And I'm Aurora Winter. I'm grateful to be Bryce Winter's sister, and I'm the author of Thought Leader Launch and several other books. So let's get right to it.
All right, then. Here we go. Oh, that's better.
That's the little camera. Ooh, that's weird.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Little light.
You got the beauty light.
Under $20, it only turns on some of the time.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that's why you pay the big bucks for the. I don't know. Just do not know.
Well, what is reliability after all? Is it really that important? So, how are you today? It's been a minute. Well, we went skiing on the weekend.
Yeah, that was so much fun.
And I'm still recovering.
You're such a good sport. Those skis were so fast, and you were like zooming along, and then whoopsie daisy.
Well, thank you so much for blaming the equipment.
Of course, it was the equipment. No edges. No edges.
Skis weren't too fast. It wasn't that I was too slow at all.
All the skis. I know you're a very good skier, but also first time in the season, right? I go regularly. That was a lot of fun.
I, as an adult, I don't think I've ever fallen down that many times in one day.
The skis. That was the only time you've used those skis. Oh.
So I wanted to thank you for doing this call.
My pleasure.
I wanted to plant a little something out there to start with, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to share a video.
Oh, great.
So I'm just going to switch here, make sure that that's working. And I thought this would be just kind of fun. Just a little piece out of this video right here by Ralph Smart, who's a psychologist.
Each one. If it wasn't for the winter, most people wouldn't appreciate the summer.
So, I thought that was just a good introduction to us right there.
Exactly. It's for 2 winters.
Well, he's going on to talk about how to get out of a despairing mood. And he is talking about, of course, utilizing our darkness to find our light. And that's really kind of where I'm hoping to discover something in our conversation. So I'm just going to let
if it wasn't for the summer, most people wouldn't appreciate the spring. You see, the dark and light are connected. And if it wasn't for the darkness, we would not become illuminated. Only in the dark night can you see the beautiful shining star. So.
Oh, that's great. Conversation starter for sure. Yeah, I like what he's saying here, and I think this is an important discussion because I don't think most people think about that it's only the summer that makes you appreciate the winter and vice versa.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I gotta say, actually, today was one of those days for me where I really woke up. It looked gloomy. So I don't know, the YouTube algorithms, they've been really working overnight at Google to get them sharpened up. So that one came up on my feed.
That's good. Google's tracking you 24/7. Probably tracked the quality of your REM sleep and decided to deliver that uplifting message.
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think I'd put that past Larry Page and the rest of them. But why is this true? Like, how, I mean, when I just look at this, like the face of it, especially if I'm feeling unmotivated, I really feel disinclined to look at the darkness because I already find that everything I look at seems depressing.
Yeah. Well, I always think why questions are not necessarily our best choice. But I'll attempt to offer something there. But I would really like us to try on, you and I, and anyone who might be listening to this later, like how could we just experiment with trying this on today or maybe for a week and just have an experiment to explore rather than have a closed mind about what's so.
Okay.
So I think that's much lighter rather than being all conclusion-y about it, because it is the conclusion that causes us trouble, I think. So when we're curious, we have an open mind and an open heart. And so when you wake up in a gloomy mood, or I do, if we just push that away, we have a closed mind about it. That's a bad mood. I don't want it. Go away. And we're shut to it, which really just makes the bad mood, like a 4-year-old child, pull harder on your pants or your dress and shriek louder for your attention because it has something to say. Whereas if and when we are willing and have a bit of capacity to go, I'm curious, what's up with that bad, gloomy mood? And turn to face it, like turning to face a child and just saying, oh, hello, what's going on with you today? And we listen, then it's possible the child is just having a temper tantrum because they've had too much sugar and they want even more. But it's also possible that, it's like a baby that's got a pin stuck through it with the old-fashioned diapers with the pins.
Right.
Myself, and that we would be well served rather than swatting it upside the head to take the pin out.
Well, I don't know if this is going off on a tangent already, but when you started talking about what, a tendency can be that we want to ignore and sort of cover, suppress it, the image that came to mind was of yeast, of like a bread rising. And I also thought how like sometimes I'll make water kefir, which is another type of reaction in a bottle. And you can close the yeast, like you could put a lid over that rising yeast dough bread, but it's going to push out, like it's going to build pressure is what it's going to do. And I think of the water kefir. I don't know if you've ever done that or if you've seen that, but it's kind of bubbly and it's like juice, but it's fermenting. And I remember actually one day in the other house waking up and thinking, oh, I need to burp my kefir because, I was told every day I need to open the lid to let the gases out. Yeah. Or it builds up too much pressure. And I specifically remember just having this kind of thought wander through my head. Oh, I need to like burp my kefir. And I didn't. And then I remember a couple of hours later hearing this sound like a shotgun ringing through the kitchen. And I run into the kitchen and then I see out of my cupboard is pouring down the wall juice and everything. And I open the door of the cupboard and the bottle has completely exploded.
That is a perfect metaphor for our feelings. I don't know about kefir, but I do know about baked potatoes. And, like a baked potato will explode if you don't just poke a tiny little hole to let the steam out.
Right.
But when we ignore our feelings, they can explode on ourselves and whoever else is close. Exactly right. Just like your kefir or like a baked potato. And there also is a trick to it, which is like a parent with a child. You are not your emotions. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. And you don't want the tempery, that's hard to say, 4-year-old part of you to be in charge. That's a mistake a lot of parents have made,
Yeah.
letting a child be in charge. So the parent part of us, or the more conscious and aware part of us, wants to have an agenda. I'll take it from the theoretical to just tell you a real example. So I woke up in a grumpy mood a few days ago. Maybe it was before we went skiing, because that was really a high point for me. And I'm like, I'm really in a cross and grumpy mood. And then I'm like, okay, well, what's up with that? Because I thought I could stomp through the entire day and let everybody else suffer. But seeing as I'm mostly working at home by myself, I'd be the one suffering.
You can stomp around all you want. You don't even have a downstairs neighbor to disturb.
I know. So I thought, well, it could be the weather. I mean, I've just moved here from California, as you know, and so the weather is kind of gloomy, and today it's quite misty, and it seems like we're in the middle of a cloud, and it was raining a lot. And it could be this, it could be that. And then I thought, well, I listened to the grumblings of the 4-year-old part of me, but then the adult part of me said, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to journal and vent a little bit for a page. And then I need to write things I'm grateful for, and really intentionally focus on that, because it's very easy to notice what you think is wrong or missing.
Well,
And
especially now. Like, because everybody's so transparent about it too. They're like, oh, how are you surviving? Like, the assumption being that there's a plethora of things wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But it's actually a survival mechanism, right? Our brain looks for danger or looks for what's wrong, because that worked. That's why Homo sapiens has survived. But it doesn't serve us as a way to live life. Shortens our life by maybe a decade. Makes every day unpleasant.
Yeah.
So, but I want to talk about this more with you, because I think there's a lot more to it than just listening and gratitude. Like what you and I were talking about pre and post the ski trip was really interesting, around how does our shadow self, the part of us that we want to ignore, or the things that occur to us like dragons, like, that message from Revenue Canada or the IRS that you don't want to open because it's a little mini dragon, how that dragon will grow. Like, if you don't open that message from the tax department, it doesn't just sit there inertly and go nicely back to sleep. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
You mean I need to open those bills?
I always ignore them as long as possible, but then it's a nightmare.
Well, I want to dive into this deeper with you as well. And the thing that I made a note earlier that you said, well, it's the conclusion that causes trouble, and asking why maybe, not the very most powerful place to start. I'm paraphrasing what you said, of course. And so I want to segue a bit. I'm going to show something else. Because I've been thinking about humor. And there's certain types of humor that seem to be more effective, and certain that really don't. And so let's take a look at this and just see what comes up. Okay.
Tell you again how much I enjoyed the other night, and again, I'm sorry for how it ended.
A ubiquity on the internet is the opinion that this show isn't funny. I don't entirely agree. Actually, it's a fun show that usually is well written, but I get the sentiment. What I do know, however, is that it's missing something. Something that made this show better. We've all heard of the Harmon story circle, but the order of Seinfeld, how Seinfeld makes itself the joke, can teach us a lot about not just how to write funny, but how to craft story. And I think it's best epitomized right here. The contest.
I'm out.
There are 3 steps to writing a great Seinfeld episode. The first of those 3 is the idea. This one is simple both in terms of how obvious it is, but also how easy it is to get it wrong. See, what a lot of sitcom writing does is it tries.
So this is so cool, and he's going to dive into it, so I'm not going to talk much, but he's really talking about, are you going to look at the conclusion, or are you going to find a way around, I think.
is to put its characters in increasingly absurd situations. The idea is that pushing a character or human being to their extreme will create humor. For example, here Howard crashes the Mars rover on, well, Mars. It attempts to create humor driven by situation, not response. This loses some of its appeal because we don't feel it. Seinfeld, on the other hand, creates humor through relatability and reaction. Its ideas are recognizable to us, the human beings watching the show. In the contest, Elaine, George, Jerry, and Kramer compete to see who can hold out the longest without,
You know, was alone.
simply put, this is an idea relatable to every single person on their couches in front of their television screens. So when the four of them start reacting to the situation, to the idea, it's assumed that you, the viewer, can relate to at least one of these four characters. Maybe you're Kramer, maybe you're Elaine. Either way, again, should be so obvious. But, well,
So one thing led to another.
So what did she do?
the second step to writing a great Seinfeld episode is in its identity. Something that Seinfeld gets very right. There is an order to the show that makes its formula almost impossible not to enjoy.
So this is a piece of why I feel like sharing this with you too, because it's about identity. And of course, for both of us, I know that's a near and dear topic. That's interested. It somehow connects
Cause
here.
and effect, and its circular nature. Remember that Dan Harmon story circle I mentioned? Well, one of the primary benefits of that writing concept is that it starts where it ends. That's very reductive, but it stuffs its main principle into a sentence. In a way, at the most superficial level, so too does an episode of Seinfeld just 25 years earlier, even if it ignores most of the rest of that story circle. The beauty of the show is how the butterfly effect becomes the joke. The show becomes the joke. It never stops being a joke, and it does this through constant cause and effect. The contest starts. Elaine meets a Kennedy. Jerry dates a virgin. Jerry tells the virgin about the contest. Virgin runs out of the apartment upset, meets the Kennedy waiting for Elaine, and leaves with him, putting Jerry and Elaine in the same place they were at the beginning of the episode. Kennedy-less and taking some time to themselves. Or take George. George's mom catches him
treating his body like it was an amusement park.
She falls, ends up in the hospital. As a result, George creates the contest, then visits his mom in the hospital, sees the sponge bath, and ends up doing exactly what landed him in that hospital room with his mother in the first place. I could make an entire video of how intricately Seinfeld episodes and its seasons are written, but to put it simply, the best Seinfeld episodes are written like a series of interconnected coincidences. And those coincidences continue throughout the entirety of its episode, creating the joke. And then they're stuffed into a race to the starting line, a loop. See, whereas most sitcoms line up their punchlines, Seinfeld's characters run into those punchlines. They stumble upon them. So, where something like this is built around problem solving, you know where it will start and you know how it will be fixed, beginning, middle, and end, Seinfeld doesn't have that predictability. And then finally, step 3, the moment.
There.
You caved? It's over? You're out? Oh my God, the queen is dead.
It's easy to lose your climax, your moment of catharsis, when you're writing relatability, or better yet, writing from beginning to seeming beginning, like we just talked about. Especially when, in the case of the contest, competition is bound to have winners and losers. But what both Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld seemed to know better than anyone else is that your climax doesn't need to be an emotional one or even necessarily character driven. It just needs to be funny. And in every episode, every single character involved, whether it's the main cast or a day player, gets their own step 1, beginning, step 2, middle, and step 3.
I'm out.
So how does that resonate with you about this topic?
Well, one of the phrases that he just goes on and illustrates that further, but I think you kind of see the whole thing. It's the episode of the climax. he talks about
Fun.
he says one of the things that makes the show work is its sense of interconnected coincidences.
Mm-hmm.
And what I connect with that is a sense like the theater of the absurd. And approaching life from the point of view of the conclusion first is the opposite. It's like the linear, logical approach. It's a stereotypical approach.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels to me more like what that sort of writing and that sort of acting establishes is maybe the point is just having fun.
I think we miss that too in life when we come up with a conclusion that this thing is bad.
Yeah.
And Seinfeld is an amazing show. Whereas the more linear one that you contrasted it with, his name escapes me,
The Big
flat
Bang Theory.
because it was a foregone conclusion and it just, kind of boring walking through the paces.
Yeah.
So I think, what stood out to me is when we are curious, we allow the possibility of miracles. Maybe this thing that you thought was horrible was actually a gift waiting to unfold, right?
Yeah. So,
sorry.
But maybe what's missing oftentimes, I'm looking in the mirror, is my state of being to see that connection. Because in a linear, like a logical state of being, my vibration, it's gonna be no higher than around 400, right? So, but if I'm approaching it, or the 400s, I think it is, but if I'm approaching it from a different perspective, let's say, is the point having fun? And that allows play, like a sense of play. And I really feel like, well, that's often what's missing, because play it encourages like very, very all over the place thinking.
Yeah. So just to put that in context, that's Dr. Hawkins' arbitrary scale of consciousness, which is exponential or logarithmic, and the 400s around logic, and the higher than logic is love, and loving life, being playful. Yeah, that's a higher vibration.
Thanks.
But mind is always happy to go for a conclusion, even if it's going to be self-crucifying. So when there's something that appears to be negative, either there's something to discover with curiosity, or there's an openness to, how is this miracle going to unfold? Maybe this is the opposite of what it appears. Or it provides an access point to deep empathy and understanding of others, that relatedness.
Yeah.
Right? So there's always going to be some kind of a gift. And the worst thing is to be stuck with the thing. It's like, this won't relate to you, but it's like having a baby and you're at 8 centimeters dilated. It's the worst part. The baby won't come out until it's 10 centimeters. And that's where we choose to stop. It's like if you find yourself, walking through hell, keep going.
I just, sorry to interrupt, but I just watched an old episode of Golden Girls last night, and Blanche's daughter is giving birth. And she's been in labor like forever, like a day. And it's just like one more push. And she's like, no. And Mom and Blanche says, it's just not a good look to go through life with a baby halfway out. Like you.
It's not a good look.
You've got to somehow summon the strength and the courage.
Yeah, and it's not a good feeling. And there is a miracle on the other side. And that's not to say that there wasn't also pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and maybe that's a really great metaphor, because I think a lot of the times we're looking to see if we can get off scot-free to this next level. Like, does there have to be pain this time as well? Are you sure?
Maybe not,
Maybe
but
not, but
that's
yeah.
commonly the process of awakening. As I mentioned to you before, like Jordan B. Peterson, my author crush that I admire so much, like he just talks about myths and archetypes and makes the point that the dragon always guards gold and also usually a princess or a virgin. And that's a metaphor because the dragon has no use for either a princess or gold. And so I think like that really resonated with me. Like all of those, stories with dragons, it's a metaphor that there always is something where you least want to look, the darkest part of the forest or the scariest thing. And how else could it be? Because the things that you're comfortable with and capable of and competent are in the light and you're dealing with them. The things that you're not so capable of or afraid of or just don't want to go there, those are the things that trip you up, like the bill from IRS or Revenue Canada that you haven't opened for 6 months. That's going to bite. But the longer you leave it, the more it's going to bite. Also, another example would be like, in a marriage, those rifts and arguments and unspoken things, the needs that are not met, unexpressed, it creates a huge explosion, like the potato or the kaffir.
Yeah.
And yes, it's disagreeable to bring it up, but then it could perhaps lead to, oh, you need that? I need that too. Let's find a way, right?
Well, so I really love this image about the dragon. And I like the idea of the treasure too, because I feel like it's that we're all seeking the treasure in our lives or the treasure of our lives or, something around our lives is a treasure. But actually the way that I tend to see it, though, when I look in the darkness is I don't really see I see the dragon, but I don't see him guarding like this hoard of glistening gold and jewels and platinum and whatnot. I see him, when I look, it's like he's guarding lead and rocks. And I have this added.
Of course, that's how we all see it.
It is, right? And I feel like, but when we look, when we allow ourselves to look, there becomes available a process of alchemy, which can turn those granite rocks and plain old lead and all that into gold and diamonds and glitter and jewels in our life. But it's the refusal to look, maybe to turn things over, maybe on one side that he guards and that we can see it looks like lead. But if we actually look and turn it around, it becomes precious. But as we keep it hidden, keep it suppressed, it just builds and builds and builds and builds and looks really ugly.
It's like tolerating. It could be considered as the where we don't look as things that we're tolerating, which is not good. But when we bring the light of our conscious awareness to something, we can take action, or we can shift to gratitude or some other things. But looking at it doesn't mean that you're going to tolerate it. Tolerating it is what we do when we wake up in a bad mood and we just ignore it and we grump all day. We allow it to exist without exploring or releasing. Sometimes you wake up in a bad mood, all you need to do is exercise or drink water. I mean, sometimes it's simple, or have a cup of coffee. But, as you know, Bryce, but just to make this point, I was waking up, sheltering in place in California and feeling like, grumpy more than I wanted to be. I'm like, well, what's going on? Why am I grumpy? It's because I was only seeing people on Zoom. And so after a while, I'm like, well, do I have to stay here? No, I'm actually, I noticed a need for more connection. And I noticed that I'm actually not a tree. I could move. And I did. Right. So sometimes whatever's making you grumpy or upset could be something that you do want to address, but you won't know what the answer is till you are willing to look at it and turn it over, like you just said.
got to be like the groundhog. He's got to stick his head up out of the ground and look around.
Yeah, exactly.
And see, like if we just stay in our burrow.
Yeah. So what's the biggest rock that you've looked under, or biggest dragon that you were avoiding or confronted by, that you did eventually look at and have a good resolution?
What a great question. I would say my hypospadia surgery as a child, where I had a genital surgery as a child, and that was something that was really, really buried, pushed down to such a degree that I actually didn't even know what the surgery was called, and I didn't know anybody else who had had it. And every time I literally looked in that direction, it made me feel sad. So I can see now, like, it fits perfectly into this metaphor. And then when I began to look, it actually occurred like, well, not to overstate it, but it occurred like a divine intervention, because it was this enormous release. It was definitely like opening the bottle of kefir and letting the gas, like the explode out. And how it felt for me, that particular thing at that time, this is a few years back, but just suddenly I tears streamed down my face, just silently, but to such a volume I've never experienced. And for such a long time, like for over an hour, until my face was sore from crying, which I know that you know what that's like, wasn't sobbing. I was just looking, and it just released like that, and a few more times I've looked at that and it's done something like that. But that, I just remember that particular moment would probably answer your question the best.
Yeah, that's, and then you were able to receive the gift of it.
I was able to begin to receive the gifts from it, as it turns out that there are, in that case for myself, more than one. And, one of the things that happened for me almost immediately out of that, was actually I received a trip to go to a gathering of other people who had had that surgery as a child, and meet with medical professionals and have a whole weekend retreat just looking and talking about that. And it was actually given to me literally as a gift as well, the whole trip. In fact, it was in another country. So it's almost like even the trip was given to me just to point out today, a decade later, how this really was a gift.
Yeah. So what are you not wanting to look at now? What am I not wanting to look at right now? What are listeners not wanting to look at right now? Those could be the biggest gifts. And for myself, I feel like when I look at something, it doesn't just necessarily happen in 15 minutes. But if I hold a sincere question in my mind, then, and if I'm open to not just assuming, like with the closed mind, the default setting of what society proclaims, then it really goes better. So for example, I need a boyfriend. I need a husband. Well, is that true? Do I really want one? Do I want one? Or is it just that people tell me that's normal, right? And therefore something must be lacking.
Story around you from society. Right.
That's not, so alive in me right now. But what I did have some epiphanies about recently is, well, is it, the society, especially in Silicon Valley. It's like, unless you're making $1 billion, you are a failure.
Mhm.
And so when I was in Silicon Valley, I still do have a really great idea for like a $1 billion company that could be a unicorn. And I was super stoked about it. I still could be. But then I asked myself, okay, what's more important, making money or being connected? And I'm like, being connected, like it's a need. Making money is just a way of, winning.
Right.
And then, now that I'm back in Canada and having the chance to reconnect with you and other family, which is so precious and sweet, I'm like, okay, so winning. How important is that? And what is winning? And what is my definition of winning as opposed to, the default setting, which is shallowly defined as just money. And I'm like, okay, well, really, I want to write this fantasy book that I've always wanted to do since being inspired by C.S. Lewis. That's a childhood dream. If I don't even try to do that, how can I say on my deathbed that I, won?
Can I just say I'm so excited about this fantasy book? I can't wait to hear more as well.
Yeah. So I'm excited too. But it did take a while to go, well, is that true? Are those my goals? Is that true for me? And to redefine your values and what matters, and then take action, and also to be playful and light in that instead of defensive, right? So, but I did see lots of people who made, 7 or 8 figures who had miserable lives. And they were still worried about money because they had payroll to meet for 60 people or whatever. What comes up for you, Bryce, when you think about the ways that you have allowed yourself to define your own life with or against the grain of society?
Well, I don't know if I'm very good at that piece of life. I'm not especially well-defined. I think one of the things that it's almost like I define myself by what I'm not singularly, because I'm such a plurality of interests and skills and emotions and different things. And, I definitely hear and know, all the time, well, it's just really a matter of focusing. You just do like one thing and you just get better at that, that will build. And I guess if I really look there, what I see is, well, that's how the world wants me to be. But it doesn't really, I've never really felt like that. Like even when I was only doing one thing, I was secretly looking for what else.
But that's your superpower.
Maybe.
Yeah, because, well, this is sort of MBA-ish, but it's also true. All the value lies in the surprise. So wherever we are a foregone conclusion, there's no profit there.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody else also saw the same conclusion. And so there's like a lot of competition. And if you have the quadrants in mind, like you have a theory, say, let's take the example of a business, but I think it does apply individually, but we can hear from you to do that part. So you have a new business idea. You're either right or you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you want to be right. And then you want to be like, is this what everybody else believes? Or what against the grain, what everybody else does not believe.
Yeah.
So in those 4 little boxes, the only one that's lucrative, obviously, if you're wrong, that's not going to be a winner. But if you're right, but it's the mainstream, you're not going to win either, because there'll be so much competition. You'll be competing with Walmart in China, robotics and AI. That sucks. But if you're right and unusual, or right and not the common view, that's where the profit is. That's where the extra value is created. And so I wasn't just joking when I said that's where the value is for you, because you are so good at holding so many things in your mind. I had the pleasure of you producing an event for me. It was such a relief not to have to worry about all the details. And you're so good at that. And you're good at many things. Comments?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like we can look at anything we want in our lives and be a critic. immediately. At least, I think it's very easy to be self-critical like this. And that's really looking at the monster guarding when we're critical, because it's looking dour. It's looking, so instead, I don't know why, it's just not more natural to say, well, actually, I just really like, having a really wide perspective. I love having a global view. I treasure the ability that I can go up to the 80,000 foot in almost any conversation. And I do in almost every conversation for a moment. And I just look at it all, including myself, like just one of the players.
There's a word for that. It's not polymath, but it's poly something. Is it polymath?
Polymath is the person with like lots of different areas where they have expertise. I don't know if What about for yourself, Aurora? How is it for you in that way? Like what's been a source for you of looking where it's seemingly darkest?
Well, I think most recently, we're in the coronavirus now, in case you listen to this much later, in the pandemic. I think for a long time, since 2014, I've thought, okay, there's something missing in me. Like I should be better. I should be a better leader. I should be a better entrepreneur. I should make more money. I should influence more people. All these litany of shoulds with the subtle message, something's missing in me, or broken, or something flawed. And while that may also be true, what I've been joyfully leaning into more recently, since the coronavirus pandemic sort of broke all the norms of life and business, which then invited me and others to redefine and recreate what they really want. I'm like, you know what? I've wanted to really focus on writing. I have actually managed to create a way to write and pay my bills. How magical is that? And instead of going from, that modest success of being able to pay my bills, doing something I love with clients that I absolutely adore. Okay, the Silicon Valley way would be, okay, let's 1,000 times the revenue and But that would call me into leading, bunches of people. And as you know, Bryce, I like somebody like you who's good at that to do that. Whereas instead, I could go the other way and I could go, oh, isn't it nice? I've got my base not covered and I love what I do and I love helping people write their books and I love ghostwriting for them and whatever. I could also go here and go, okay, now that that's covered, I'm not going to reach for 10xing or 100xing the revenue and 100xing the problems. I'm going to write this fantasy book series that I've wanted to write for a super long time, and it doesn't need to make money.
Wow.
And I can take the time to do it. Does that make sense?
Well, and not only makes sense, but I'm sure that it doesn't just occur to me, but that, when we say, now I can do this, I have the freedom, I'm doing it, it doesn't even need to make money. It's probably when it will as well,
Yeah.
But why, well, I guess you kind of said, but why look there? Was it, where were you looking, let's say? Where were you looking that you saw, hey, it's okay just as it is, and I can add something now that I love on top, and it doesn't need to take anything away?
Well, it's kind of interesting. When you change one variable in your life or you come to one clarification, how other things can have a domino after that. So when I realized, does it really make sense to live in Silicon Valley, which is a newish place for me, where it's still making friends, which is hard to do on Zoom, and you can't go to church or any meetings and, sort of develop things spontaneously. Does it really make sense for me to be paying a huge overhead and staying in Silicon Valley, because coronavirus doesn't seem to be going away next week? And I'm feeling like Zoom is not meeting my needs for connection. And I'm noticing that I can do that for a few months, but do I want to do that for a few years? Not so much. So then the first one, as I mentioned before, the first trigger was, there's TED Talks about it. The number one key to happiness and longevity is not whether you smoke or how you eat or how often you exercise, it's connection. And so I'm like, okay, am I really willing to sacrifice my health and potential longevity and choose lack of connection when there's so many things making that difficult. So then I decided I would move back to Canada and be closer to you and other members of our family. And that filled up that tank that was empty.
Okay.
And then with that tank full, I thought, oh, well, maybe this drive to make more money was because I had an empty tank feeling and I was reaching for something to fill it up.
It's kind of like when we're thirsty, we might eat because we think our stomach is empty, but actually we're just thirsty. We don't need food. We're not hungry. We just need water.
Brilliant. So then I thought, once I was a little bit settled, okay, so should I carry on with my business as it was and try to 10x it, or should I go for this unicorn idea that could be a super big company but would involve raising capital, and would I like to take on that challenge, which would be kind of fun? Or wait a minute, my overhead is lower, my connection needs are filled, I feel happy. What do I really want? What is really meaningful? Like, is money meaningful? No, it's not meaningful. It's only meaningful if you don't have enough to cover your nut. Once you've covered your overhead, freedom is more important. And that means freedom of time, or it is to me, freedom to do what I want to do, freedom to create. So I looked at, so what if I made more money? So what? Do I want less time? Do I want more people to have payroll for? Do I like that? Is that what I'm really good at? No. You're good at managing people. Read Bryce's book about teams. But I'm very creative, and I love to express that creativity, and I haven't given myself permission to write a fantasy book because I thought, well, there's no money in that.
Right.
And now I can. And I am. And it's fun. And I'm filtering everything through, what if this was fun? What if it was easy?
Well, you know what? And it
more than enough.
And you're a different person. You're a different woman now from like just a few weeks ago to me. Because this is all quite recent, what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's happening now.
And you are more fun. And it's obvious you're having more fun. And we're not, like, it wasn't the topic, but it is interesting. Like, we do touch on money a bit, and it's no wonder because it is such a prevalent item in the agenda of the world. But it is interesting when you've had money, more than sufficient, when you've had more than sufficient money, and not, so that you can kind of see the difference. And speaking personally, the curious thing that has occurred for me is I'm actually, although I like to earn more money, and it's nice to have lots of money. It's very helpful for many useful things, including the ability to be more free and maybe have more connections with people and spend more time with people. These are wonderful things. And yet, overall, when I look at having had more than I needed and having less at different times, after all of that, I'm not actually all that driven to make a whole lot of money. It's not the factor. It doesn't drive at all. Because when I go back and I recollect how when I had a surplus of money, was I happier? Was I more connected? Was I having more insights? Was I being more creative? Was I just basically having more fun? The answer is not actually like an unqualified yes. It has its moments, but it's not enough in and of itself. That's all I'm saying, I guess.
Well, I'm really hopeful that the pandemic will help challenge people to look at what really matters. So
right.
you know Bryce Buckminster Fuller is one of my big heroes, and he really emphasized that it's meaning that matters, not money. And I think people are really driven by what's meaningful, and the easy thing to look at is your identity. And if you have the identity of a winner, then you may want more money. But actually, your identity as an entrepreneur or as somebody who is successful or prosperous is really what's driving you.
Mhm.
Whereas Bryce, I see you, your identity, and you'll correct me, but I see you're more of an inventor and a creator and a forward thinking visionary who's like ahead of the curve. And that's got its drawbacks, but it's also a rare gift. And that identity can be fueled and is fueled when you write books and you create systems and you're always thinking about new things. And how would money really play into that? It just does play into it for you or for me or for anybody. If you don't have enough, then suddenly it becomes urgent.
Right, exactly. Like it plays into the mechanics. But I find, and I find that what really the reward of the systems, the books, the concepts, everything that you mentioned that I love and I'm passionate about is connection. That's my reward.
Yeah,
like,
you are.
This conversation here with us together today, this is worth more than, a check to me.
Me too. Like on the weekend when the idea was floated by, oh, why don't I come and pick you up? And then we can go cross country skiing and then we'll have dinner together as a family. And, if I was in Silicon Valley, I would be like, I don't have time to do that.
Right.
But now
right.
that I've looked at what was hidden behind the dragon,
mm-hmm.
and I'm like, actually, connection is the most happy and important thing, but important in a light and joyful and meaningful and sweet and satisfying way, not important in a desperately needed money way, although it is needed. I digress. So I'm behaving differently.
Yeah.
And I'm, going cross country skiing on the weekend or going hiking instead of working all the time. I had one more important thing to say about money.
All right.
In North America, our standard default setting by, programmed into us by our collective unconscious is no matter how much money you're making, you're spending that plus 10%. And so you're always not enough, right?
Doesn't matter. The numbers matter. It's never enough.
It's never enough. And there's an anxiety when you're spending more than you make. And you and I have both chosen to allow ourselves more creative freedom and choose low overhead for now. Mm-hmm. And it's delightful for me. How about you?
It's fun. That's an adventure. Like, for instance, in my case, living without a car at the moment, it's like, whoa, that's not normal in North America. That's not really how our suburbs are laid out and whatnot. And, and yet it works. It totally works for us right now, especially when I have such a kind and generous sister pick me up and we'll go skiing, right? So, and isn't it nice actually to allow others to help fill in?
Well, it's the greatest time to talk to somebody when you're driving together in a car.
Yeah.
And I don't have a car right now either. And I can be transparent. Like when I moved to BC, I just thought automatically, oh, I'll get a car. It's, it's like the end of the season. They'll be getting the new model in and I'll just, I started looking at cars and the Subaru and this and that. And I'm like, oh, I'll get a new one and then I'll lease it because who wants to have a used car? Because that was the problem with my other car, which broke down. But then I'm like, okay, hold on a second. That's an automatic choice.
Mm-hmm.
That do I need a car? Do I want a car?
Mm-hmm.
How much does it cost to own a car? Like just examining things instead of like automatic. I'm like, well, by the time you add the lease and the this and the that and the insurance, it's maybe $600 a month. I'm like, where am I going to go? It's the pandemic. We're supposed to shelter at home. When we go too far, we have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So where do I want to go? I'm like, well, grocery store. So if I took a cab to and from the grocery store every time and didn't, borrow a car from family who are generously offered one or two, how many times would I have to shop for it to be $600 or more? Like, well, that's ridiculous to buy a car. I've got nowhere particular to go. And I can take a cab. There's no Uber or Lyft here.
No, not up in Squamish.
Yeah. But it's empowering to make a conscious choice instead of assuming that that's a problem that needs to be solved. Is it? I could solve it if I want.
Is that even a problem, or can we just play there? Can we just see how it comes out? And I bet you haven't even taken a taxi that many times either. Probably.
No, I haven't even taken one yet at all.
So, because as it happens, I guess part of the reason, just to let anybody know who's looking in, but our family has more like a surplus of cars. So it's just like, if we look at ourselves more like a group or a community, it's not really necessary that every single person has their own dedicated one.
Yeah, it's just like, and then where am I going to park it? It's more of a parking shortage than a car shortage.
Yeah.
I had another important point, but what was it? Oh, yes. So often we look at what's missing. So I could say, oh, I'm missing a car, and oh, I need to borrow a car to go pick Bryce up, which is no problem. But so often we don't take the next step of looking at, well, what's the benefit? So I'm not rushing out to get a car, although I do have the money set aside for it, and I could to get one, because I'm like, oh, well, if I don't have a car when the coronavirus pandemic and sheltering at home clears, then I can travel, to Italy, to France, to Thailand, to Greece, and leave my home here, which is modest overhead, and not have the additional expense of the overhead of a car. And then I can travel around the world and pay for that easy peasy. So
you're not going to drive your car from Vancouver to Greece.
Exactly. So whatever seems to be missing, when we just think of it as the bother and don't take an extra few moments to explore it with the curious mind, we miss out on, well, what is the benefit?
Yeah. So, one thing we're going to wrap up, and I want to say, what did I get? And one thing I really got, and it sort of came out of the tail end of your discussion, was there's a benefit in actually not jumping to action or conclusions, but just kind of dwelling, not in grief, sadness, depression, but just dwelling with what is, and just being a little bit maybe like naive, like having more of a childlike attitude about what is, so that not jumping into, oh, I'm going to take this money, I'm going to buy a car or whatnot, and looking and seeing, well, what if I didn't, and what are the benefits, and it might be that you don't have money for a car. It might be that there's other obstacles, but those in themselves become places to dwell and to look, and have more of a neutral stance, as opposed to having reached a conclusion that my options are already, circumscribed or something in this area. Well, maybe they're not.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the really cool thing is it will happen automatically, because when we are, okay, I wake up in a grumpy mood, I am grumpy, there's no other person there. And when we go, okay, I'm curious, how come you're grumpy, Aurora? Already I've split into two. There's the grumpy part of me, and there's this conscious, curious, higher vibration witness energy. So even just doing the what's up with that automatically raises your vibration, even though you might still feel grumpy. Your body might be grumpy. Maybe you didn't have enough sleep. Maybe you drank too much last night. Maybe you don't have enough water. But the curious energy, or the conscious energy, already is a helpful thing. I think there's a lot more to be said about this. And I really honor your curiosity around how the shadow self can be turned to be a breakthrough.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for just diving into this conversation together. And it was really a lot of fun.
My pleasure, Bryce. Anytime.